Well, the events in the Middle East during the last event of the year are overshadowed to some extent by two events, coronavirus and elections in the United States. So the reflection of the second is, I think, also contradictory upon the Middle East, because some people, well, if we quote from Richard III by Shakespeare, now is the winter of our discontent made glorious summer by the son of Biden. But this conclusion is shared by some and completely not shared by the others. But we are more interested in what is happening in the region itself, because well, the global players, their role for different reasons seem to descend to some extent, and so well, it's interesting to see what changes have happened in the bigger Middle East itself. We consider that the region has extended itself. Therefore, we are speaking about the bigger Middle East, because some non-Arab states started to play more prominent role. I would later well, try to find out what were the answers to the questions we put. So these changes that happened during this year, are the fundamental changes or not? So if they are, how can you characterize them? Then these changes seem to be connected by the following. Maghreb, for instance, is divided from the rest of the region by the Libyan Trench. What does it mean for the sub-region, and what interconnections with what are its interconnections with the other Arab countries? Three non-Arab states, Iran, Israel, and Turkey, turned to be maybe most powerful regional powers, starting and from the last period and up to 2019. Are there any changes in that or not? What will be the results of the big deal? What does does the role of the Gulf states increase or decline? Eastern Mediterranean and Trans-Caucasian regions, are they involved in the widening conflict zone of the bigger Middle East? To what extent, temporarily or permanently, does Egypt regain the role of a regional power? And post-war Syria, Lebanon, and Iraq, is the integration of these three countries possible or not? These are not all the questions we can put, but I think that these questions may be some guide questions to the starting discussion. We distributed a questionnaire between the listeners, and we got 10 replies to the questions put there. The first questions was is the role of non-Arab countries in the region started to play dominant role? All the 10 replied yes. The role of Iran increased or declined? 3 replied increased and 7 replied declined. About Turkey, the same question. Did its role increase or decline? 9 replied increased, and only 1 said declined. The same about Israel. 9 said increased, and 1 said declined. So now, and the last question was, what of the Arab countries do you consider to play the role of the dominant, of the bigger regional power? 1 reply is the United Arab Emirates, 2 Saudi Arabia, 6 no one, and 1 ironically said Turkey, although it's not an Arab country. So these are some precautions to the discussion. And now I would say some words about the schedule. I consider that the discussion will take place for about 2 to 2.5 hours. We gave 10 minutes for speakers, each 10 minutes for each question, and 5 minutes for each intervention. So I'm pleased to start with Mr. Yahya Zubair from Cage Business School in France. Please, you are welcome.
Sir, Yahya asks if it's possible he will be the second. There are some problems with connection now.
In this case, we invite Mr. Alexander Aksenenok, Ambassador Alexander Aksenenok, to start the discussion. Please.
So since 2011 and 2015, we observe fundamental political changes in internal process, as well as in political terms, on geopolitical terms. The changes were the lines, as the organizers of the conference rightly underlined, were the lines of interplay and that of confrontation are overlapping and overcrossing each other. So this shifting landscape raises a lot of questions, and many of them still unanswered, remain unanswered. I have a doubt that we are going to find any solid answers to them. Middle East is the Middle East. So the popular protests that unfolded across the Arab region in 2011 seemed poised to open a new era, but it didn't happen. And the social, economic, and political factors that led to popular uprisings continue to drive unrest across the region. In turn, Arab leaders have also adapted, fighting back calls for change with targeted propaganda campaigns and repressive crackdowns. Egypt is an example. Saudi Arabia as well, in spite of reforms from the top. I would like to name two sources of tensions, sources of tension, and even playing on the brink of confrontation in Mashriq region. First, Saudi Arabia and Persian Gulf, and the second axis of instability stretching from Iraq to Syria and Lebanon. I want to concentrate on the latter, on the axis of instability between Baghdad and Beirut. Lebanon faces the most existential crisis in its contemporary history because the four pillars of the statehood of Lebanon existence collapsed. The political system, I mean the power sharing on confessional basis, is in doubt. The economic model, Lebanon as a commercial state, is failing, and the massive wealth destruction occurred. I mean, impoverished middle class, and the fourth one, the culture of Lebanon as an open democratic state. Maybe it was the only one in the Middle East, but now this model is restricted and even destroyed completely. So Iraq, what we have in Iraq, the uprising of 2019 had several unique features. First, the struggle was within the Shiite house. Shiites were battling Shiites while the Kurds and the Shia were watching from the sidelines. So the popular uprising shifted for a while, stopped. It stopped because of pandemic, but generally it is directed at the state institutions which are viewed as corrupt and rotten. These people who view it as corrupt, as rotten, they are called insurrectionists, and they are demanding no less than annulment of present constitution. So the complicating these structural problems even further is the fact that Iraq is caught between two hugely powerful external forces that it can neither control nor choose between. It can neither control or choose between United States and Iran. This is the situation of complete impasse and complete impasse. So Syrian regime is badly losing popularity. Popularity grounds even among its own supporters. It cannot fight the corruption among its governmental bodies. The economic situation in the country is rapidly collapsing. The Lebanese financial crisis, international sanctions, and the suspension of Iranian credit line are contributing factors to the decline. So the full control of the warlords on the decision-making channels of Syria became even more noticeable after the recent parliamentary elections results that were taken as humiliation by many Syrians. So we're having 5-6 months left before the presidential elections. Moscow might find itself supporting an illegitimate, and if you don't like this term, an illegitimate applied to Syria, I would say unrecognized regime internationally. So the narrative that divides the region today are no longer predominantly about Sunni versus Shia, Arabs versus Persians, or Muslim versus Jews. The common slogan of the mass process is pre-COVID period was all of them means all of them. And so the Arab world seems to be in a chronic state of dysfunction, and it's going to remain like that in the aftermath of this year.
Excuse me, Alexander, you have 2 minutes left. Do you want your time extended for some minutes?
Yes. So the lines we're talking about in the Middle East are overcrossing and shifting between the allies. Despite its partnership with Iran and Syria, Russia has maintained relations with regional states. And, the same problems face the United States with Turkey, as Russia with Turkey as well. The United States with Saudi Arabia, as Russia with Iran. So we have an overlapped and very contradictory situation, which is very difficult to predict. Given the US-Iran tensions during the Trump administration, the Iran file is likely to dominate the debate in the United States, European, and Middle Eastern foreign policy circles in the months to come. The debate will focus on how the new US administration will reassess its policies towards Iran and how it will engage with the new multipolar Middle East. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll proceed with speakers, and then we'll have questions and interventions. So Yahya Zubair, please.
He still has some problems with connection. Maybe he'll join us later. He's trying to connect to us.
In this case, I give floor to Nikolai Surkov. Nikolai, please, we are listening to you.
Thank you, Konstantin. I'm glad to see my distinguished colleagues, and I'm very grateful for this opportunity to talk a little bit about the current situation in our favorite region of the world. Well, first of all, I was very inspired by the questions you sent me and what I have to say. It looks like currently we are witnessing a new normalcy in this region, which includes much higher level of uncertainty, involving more conflicts, very fierce competition between world and regional powers. It also involves more internal conflicts. Actually, we don't see very many interstate conflicts nowadays, but internal conflicts are becoming more and more widespread. And what is worse, they often are hybrid conflicts, which involve lots of non-state actors or proxies. So it's also very important. It is a very important change. Next, what we see now is that there are many fragile or failed states in the region nowadays. this list of such states includes Libya, Syria, Yemen, Iraq, and Lebanon, 5 states, which is absolutely intolerable, especially in comparison with the situation we had 10 years ago. We also see that there are new external players which become more and more active. And I'm not speaking about the world powers, I'm talking about Iran and Turkey. And we also witness economic crisis, which hits the region and makes it less and less stable. What is also very interesting, that the role of energy resources is declining. The importance of this region is now depending mostly on its importance as a transportation hub, not as a source of energy resources. And we also see a clear, growing, genuine demand for reforms on behalf of the populations in many countries. So this is a sign of very long and very strong instability. But going back to the questions you've sent me and speaking about the things that happened in 2020. Well, of course, there is the normalization between Israel and the Arab states, and it is clearly a thing that will lead to a transformation of the region. Well, it might lead, I would say. It's not 100% guaranteed, but anyhow, we can expect that if this normalization trend continues, we will see that the Arab world and the region change dramatically. Well, first of all, it will be a clear sign that the Palestinian issue is not the issue anymore, the way we saw it 10 or 20 years ago. Palestinian issue will be something very much second-rate. But we will, on the other hand, we will see that Israel will be integrating step by step into the region, and it will have a new status. Primarily, it was, well, previously Israel was mostly seen as an enemy, an arch enemy of the Arab world and of the Muslim world. But now we might see that Israel is turning into a partner or even an ally. And I think that this will lead to a formation of a number of axes, or alignments in this region. We are used to a certain balance of power in the Middle East when Israel is against the Arab world, or, for example, when the Arab world is or Gulf monarchies are facing the Iranian expansion. But now, very soon, we might have three alignments or 3 axes. And that'll be also a very interesting change, which actually started this year. And we will see an axis of resistance, well, headed by Iran. We will be facing a neo-Osmanic axis headed by Turkey, and there will be also an axis of moderation headed by the Saudis, headed by Saudi Arabia, and it will most likely include Israel and Egypt. So that will be the new balance for the Middle East and for the broader MENA region. We can also see a clear trend, especially it became especially obvious this year that the traditional leaders of this region are on decline. They can no longer play this dominating role. But on the other hand, we can see that non-Arab states, Israel, Turkey, and Iran, are very quickly increasing their influence because they managed while the Arab world is unstable and very fragile, those three countries still maintain their internal stability, and they also maintain their economic potential, which is important nowadays because, for example, the Gulf states, though they have some financial resources, they are much less prepared to play the leading role even financially because they need their financial resources for the internal projects, and they cannot invest in foreign policy as much as they used to invest even 10 years ago.
The same remark, Nikolai. You have 2 minutes left.
Yes, thank you. I'm almost done.
Okay.
So I'm still speaking about the changes and the trends in the region. So speaking a little bit more about the Gulf states. Still, we can see that the Gulf states, this is also the trend of 2020 from my point of view, they're getting more and more active. They engage actively in a strategic diversification of their foreign policies. They are developing ties with Israel. They are also trying to attract more attention from China. And still, what we see that they are more and more independent in their foreign policy. They seem to realize that there will be no external players who will come and fix the situation in the region because there are no external players who can do this. Even the United States is not capable anymore of changing the overall situation in this region. So, and they are not interested. While Russia or China, they are not prepared to influence the situation in the region the way the Americans did. So now the regional players have to rely on their own, have to do it on their own, and have to rely on their own resources, military resources, human resources, financial resources. And they seem to realize it, and they are trying to shift the balances. So we will, the conclusion of this presentation is that within next 2 or 3 years, we will see dramatic shifts in the region in many spheres, in social and economic spheres, but also we will see the changing system of regional relations. Thank you. I'm ready to answer the questions.
Thank you very much, Nikolai. So what about Yahya Zubair now?
Yeah, I can hear you now. My sincere apologies. Hi, everybody. I'm in the dark. Now it's back. We were freezing, and as you can see, I have a very heavy coat. In any case,
anyhow, it's nice to hear you and to see you somewhat.
Thank you very much. It was a struggle, but they just restored the power in my neighborhood. This being said, I heard the last, in passing, I heard what Nikolai said, that the Palestinian question is no longer, in the hot burner. I would disagree with respect to the Maghreb, at least with respect to Algeria, for instance, where both the government and the population is very much interested in the Palestinian issue and support for the Palestinians. In fact, what is happening today is the feeling that Algeria is being punished or being encircled due to its position on the Palestinian question, because this was reiterated by the president back in May or June, where he said there are two questions for Algeria, where Algeria would not change its principles, and that is Palestine and the Western Sahara. And lo and behold, now you have seen what happened yesterday with the declaration from Trump recognizing or stating Morocco's sovereignty over an occupied territory, saying that, you know, the normalization, I mean, the transaction was made at the expense of all UN resolutions, including US policy, which maybe in behind the scenes was favorable to Morocco and was favorable to the autonomy, but at least there was a process, a UN process to basically have a solution, but not a unilateral decision as has been made. So it was a transaction. What we have seen recently in the Maghreb is the interference of a variety of powers. Since the Arab uprising, the main was Libya, obviously, where the Gulf has intervened directly through the supply of weapons and finances and so on and so forth. So this has, of course, created instability around Tunisia, and I guess that my friend Youssef will talk about that. You know, with Tunisia and Algeria are directly affected. But there is an axis, the same axis that is forming between Israel and the Gulf states, and of course the United States, is you know, unfolding in the Maghreb region. And we saw, this is the perfect example. What happened yesterday was a logical you know, development, in the sense that there was talk about Trump or Jared Kushner talking about normalization between Israel and Morocco, you know, with the U.S. offering to Morocco Western Sahara on a silver platter. So, and of course, the UAE was the first one that had opened a consulate in the occupied territory, signaling that not only did it support Morocco, but it supported also the occupation, or the Morocco's sovereignty, which has not been recognized before by any real state. So what is currently happening? You know, this is the scenario, in a sense, of the Cold War, where you have that during the Cold War, you had that alignment where Algeria was more or less with the Soviet Union and with what was known as the Front of Steadfastness. And then you have another axis, which was with the so-called Arab moderates, Morocco, Egypt under Sadat, you know, and Israel, and of course with the blessing of the United States. So this is I think this development is extremely dangerous, because not only are the Gulf states being involved, but there is also the rivalries happening in the Gulf region, or in the region at large, that are spilled over the Maghreb. In the past, the Maghreb was basically left to itself with a certain game. My view is when in late September, early October, when Mark Esper, who was then Secretary of Defense, when he went to the region, I think if one had to read between the lines, he basically gave the signal that either you are aligned with the United States against China and Russia, or, you know, of course, it was crafted in a diplomatic language, but in many ways, it is showing these shifting alliances that are spilling over. So now, what role Turkey is getting involved, even in the Sahel, because it's no longer, when you look at the Maghreb today, you cannot separate it from the Sahel region, because the Gulf Arabs are also getting involved in the region, whether it is with the G5, funding the G5 in the name of the war against terrorism. But there are, I think, there are a lot of interests nowadays, not only in sub-Saharan, in the Sahel, but in sub-Saharan Africa in general. And to be quite honest, I think the involvement of the Gulf states is pretty damaging to the cohesion of the Maghreb region. It's exacerbating. Algeria and Morocco have had those tense moments over Western Sahara or other issues. But now these alignments of the monarchies, with the Moroccan monarchy, with Algeria feeling surrounded, and in fact, yesterday, a former minister, and in fact, another general also had stated that Algeria, basically, I mean, if you read between the lines, that Algeria is not going to break its ties with either Russia or China, that it will maintain the close relationship that it had developed with them since the Algerian War of National Liberation in the 1950s. And this has been repeated again. In other words, Algeria is proclaiming loud and clear, it's not going to succumb to outside pressure, even though it feels surrounded with all that pressure. And I think it's a very dangerous, to be quite honest with you, I have never seen the Maghreb be in such dangerous, situation, because the tensions, I'm afraid, may spill over into something else. Morocco was encouraged to break the ceasefire. It was Morocco that broke the ceasefire. The Sahrawis simply said, now we don't observe it, since it had been done by the other side. And what is amazing in this situation is how those who are supposed, the states that are supposed to uphold international law and what have you, are going straight breaking every UN resolution or every rule of law that they pretend to be upholding. So it's really a dangerous game to inflame the region, which is not doing great economically. Morocco is not doing well economically, neither is Tunisia. Libya is in shambles. And Mauritania now, because of the Gargarat, this border, is also being weakened. And I think the next one to normalize relations with Israel is going to be Mauritania, simply to feel some sort of protection from any pressure.
Dr. Yahya Zubair, do you want your time to be extended?
No, it's fine. I think I have said it all, and I'll be happy to discuss any, to answer any questions or to elaborate on any of the points. But thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. I think that all the three presentations were very interesting, and they included many new thoughts about the developments in the Middle East. So it's time now for questions to the speakers, and then to interventions. Please, questions now.
May I ask questions to Nikolai Surkov?
Yes, please.
Nikolai, yeah, I have two questions for you. You were talking about fragile and failed states in the region, and you mentioned 5 of them, as far as I remember: Syria, Libya, Iraq, Yemen, and Lebanon. So my first question is, do you differentiate anyhow between fragile and failed? And what do you see analytical added value in uniting all these different states into a single category of failed or fragile? Don't you think that it would be it would be better to see them as unique cases and not compare with one another under the same rubric. This is number one. And the second one is about your remark about disengagement of traditional powers from the region, and you, I think, meant mostly the United States. And what Dr. Yahya Zubir said about Mark Esper's visit and his remarks is saying that even in Maghreb, United States is not going to, completely abandon its policies, at least under this administration, of trying to intervene and do as much as it needs to secure its interests. So even if you stick to this point of disengagement, under possible Biden administration, what would you see as a possible re-engagement if now it's disengagement? Would it be re-engagement with the region under Biden administration? And in what way, in which way?
Yes, thank you for these questions. Well, I'll try to explain. I use these categories of fragile and failed states in order to show that currently, we have a new normalcy. If you remember the situation we had, for example, in the year 2000 or even in 2010, it was quite different, because though maybe except Somalia, which is a semi-Arab state, yes, well, with the exception of Somalia, we had no failed or even fragile states in this region. Well, maybe Iraq was a different story, but even in Iraq 10 years ago, there was a hope for a wide-scale reconstruction. There was a hope that the state building process will succeed. I remember the enthusiasm of the Iraqi authorities, of the Iraqi politicians. Well, so I used these terms, fragile and failed states, in order to show that these are the states that are in a very vulnerable position. Well, of course, I differentiate between these two categories. From my point of view, Lebanon is a fragile state, while Libya is clearly a failed state, because there is no nation, there is no even single national identity. It is a completely fractured society. So from my point of view, Libya is very much like Somalia these days. As for other examples which I provided, also take the example of Yemen. Yemen is not a unified state. It is a very fractured society. It is on the brink of collapse, and I don't think that any other name but a failed state will be suitable for this country. Well, as for Iraq, it's not hopeless, though what I expect that there will be a more fragile state very soon because of the pandemic, which hit the economies badly, and sooner or later massive protests will intensify, because the people will simply starve and will go to the streets to demand for food, not for political freedoms or any human rights, but simply for food. As for the US engagement or disengagement or re-engagement, it's a disengagement still. Despite some tactical steps, the Americans are taking tactical steps. I call it rear guard fighting, because the Americans are very much concerned with the issue of responsible withdrawal. That was the case of Iraq about 10 years ago. Now we can see that they are trying to arrange a responsible disengagement with this region. They might take some, as I said, some tactical steps in order to stabilize the situation, in order to normalize relations with Israel. But I don't see any reasons for them to re-engage with the region, at least at the level of engagement they used to have in the 90s, in the 80s, in the 70s. They don't need this region anymore that much, though they still repeat those mantras that they have some strategic ties with the countries of the region, that they are dedicated to the security of their partners. But in reality, the US doesn't have the resources to do that. And which is more important, they don't have the political will to do this. There are much more important issues for them to deal with nowadays. And their priorities are mostly in the Asian Pacific region, or in Europe, by the way, because if you listen to the statements, especially by the US military and the politicians, they are now talking either about China or about Russia. But the Middle East is very low in their priority list. That's the situation, and that's how I perceive it. Well, there might be some tactical things, but the strategy is to disengage.
Thank you, Nikolai. Other questions, please?
Well, could I have a question?
Okay, it's okay.
Okay, thank
Yeah.
I thought there was a question for me from Vladimir.
Yes, please.
Yes. Well, first, regarding the Maghreb, and if we extend it to Libya, and I would agree with Nikolai that Libya is a collapsed state. It's not even a fragile or failed. It's collapsed state. And the interesting part about Libya is that it's no longer, not even a proxy war. It's directly a war. It's I think the rivalry is now fought on Libyan soil, and the U.S. is disengaged only insofar that it is not directly involved in the conflict, but it has shown more interest because precisely of what Nikolai said, this Russian presence and the fear that there might be some naval base or some other issue. With regard to the western part, what Vladimir asked, the U.S. has never been a very big player in the Maghreb. It has ties, it has a long-standing relationship with Morocco, it has improved relations with Algeria. But when Esper came, the two sides signed a 10-year military agreement. So in a sense, Morocco plays a proxy role, like it did during the Cold War. In other words, it's useful to do things. Response to the US says you need to normalize with Israel, Morocco will jump on that bandwagon and so on. But in terms of real presence, if you check the economic relations, they are very weak. And from a US perspective all along, the idea is that the Maghreb is a sort of preserve of Europe. It's in the hands of Europe. It's only important as long as it's the southern flank of NATO and watches the situation. But in terms of engagement, there is no re-engagement. The engagement in the region is minimal. In terms of resources, it's the hydrocarbons with Algeria. That's the only real deal, economic deal that the US had. But again, please do remember what I said about it's not just the Maghreb. Where the US is implicated is in the Sahel. Precisely because China is quite in there, and then Russia is coming back. So that is why you can talk about more about the Sahel as such, where there are these joint maneuvers every year that brings together Europeans and Sahelian states. And by the way, since Nikolai used the term of failed or fragile, all the surrounding states are fragile in that region. Mali is in shambles. There's a problem there, which what I mean by that is that these countries are open to intervention. They could provide the justification for foreign presence in the territory, in the region.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yelena Savacheva.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Well, so
And then Jerry Perstein.
my name
Jelena
is
Savic and then Jerry.
Okay, I represent the People's Friendship University of Russia, and I'd like to address my question to Dr. Yahya. First of all, let me thank you for your interesting presentation. You have touched upon the situation mostly in North Africa. But I'd like to address you a question dealing with the neighboring region. The region of the Red Sea. We used to call this region a sleepy one, a sleepy region, but now some changes have taken place here. So how would you estimate the situation in the region of the Red Sea? Thank you very much.
Well, this situation is more or less similar. If you look at the Red Sea, again, you have states that are not all, powerful economically or what have you, and there is an expansion of the rivalry between Israel and Iran, Israel or Saudi Arabia and Iran, and you see the building of various bases. Of course, China for the first time also built a base which is a dual base. It's not really a military base. It's more of a logistics base, but with the capabilities, military capabilities, to protect, the shipping of its own commercial goods or minerals and oil and what have you. But we are witnessing in that region the very same thing, that is, these all the rivalries that are currently happening in the Gulf, that is Iran on the one hand, and then the Gulf monarchies on the other, plus Israel and Egypt. And so you see, in a sense, two camps with all of which are building bases and trying to impose, to influence developments in that region. Don't forget, there are serious economic interests in that part. Yes, they are geostrategic, but once again, terrorism provides all the explanation. You have, I don't know how many thousands of troops and so on, to allegedly fight terrorism. But as you and I know, it's not about terrorism. There are more important economic interests in the region, but also there are some ideological ones, if you wish, but they are secondary. To me, this question about Sunni versus Shia or Muslim Brotherhood versus Salafi, it's secondary. There are much more important economic and strategic interests.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let me exploit my position. I would put two questions to Ambassador Alexander Aksenenok. In our replies to the questionnaire, speaking about the role of Iran, only three people stressed that the role of Iran increased, and 7 said that it declined during the current year. But speaking about Turkey, they definitely insist that its role increase, because only one says no, but 9 say yes. Do you agree with these positions? If you agree, can you explain why? If you don't, explain why you don't agree. Please, Ambassador Alexander.
Yes, thank you, Konstantin, and thanks for these questions. Um, uh, First, the role of Iran. I cannot share completely the view that the role of Iran is going to decline or increase. It will depend on a number of factors and a number of future development, connected mostly with the eventual changes or new style, I would better say, of the US behavior in the Middle East after. Certainly the Biden declared his desire to get back to the nuclear deal with Iran, JCPOA, but it is not enough, his desire, because he will be head of a very complicated multilateral process with participation of regional and foreign powers. And Iran, as you know, is very shrewd in his diplomacy historically, and it will depend on how Iran, where there is happening now an internal struggle in Iran around its tactics or as to future negotiations with the United States. I think that it will depend on Iran whether he is going to properly assess the situation, or from the other side, it depends on the Biden administration. To what extent it will yield to the temptation to get back to the to correct this mistake. It will be very uneasy for the United States, given the domestic developments, polarization inside. So if Biden succeeds and Iran is going to retreat a bit without insisting on compensation or something like that, I think that the role of Iran, as far as regional aspects of its policy, is going to decrease, is going not decline, increase. And as far as another condition, another precondition is the development of rocket potential, I think no. There will be no any retreat, any concessions from Iran on this point. As far as Turkey concerns, I agree completely that Turkey will stay in the region as an assertive and sometimes aggressive one. Thank you.
So please, Ambassador Feddersen, your question.
Thank you, Konstantin, and thank you for organizing this, and a special thanks to Alexander and Nikolai and Yahya for their interventions, all of which were very interesting. And I look forward to an opportunity, perhaps later in the event, to talk a little bit about my perspective on Biden and where the U.S. is going. But right now, I have a question for Yahya. And it's interesting to me that in this conversation, which is meant to cover the whole Middle East, we're spending a fair amount of time talking about the Maghreb, which is usually the part of the region that's most forgotten. But what struck me about the decision yesterday for the United States to recognize Moroccan sovereignty in the Western Sahara, which they resisted. And you know, it was very interesting that in the period before the November 3rd election, when the Trump administration was making a full press on friendly Arab states to normalize relations, primarily and quite transparently because they thought it would help them win particularly evangelical Christian votes and perhaps some Jewish votes. The Moroccans were clear that the price for their normalization would be recognition of their sovereignty in the Western Sahara. The United States refused, which frankly surprised me because there is certainly no principle that Donald Trump recognizes that's not in his interest. But nevertheless, they did, and they got the UAE, I think, to recognize sovereignty, perhaps thinking that that would be enough to satisfy the Moroccans. It wasn't, and Morocco held out until the US came around, which we did. But the thing that struck me is that for most of the last, at least for the last 10 or 20 years, even though we've had a very long and positive relationship with Morocco, and we have not had that kind of a relationship historically with Algeria, over the last couple of decades, certainly the US has tried to balance between those two. We've tried to maintain a close relationship with both Algiers and Rabat. But what seems to have happened, and what perhaps allowed the US to make this decision yesterday, was that clearly Algeria is no longer considered to be a significant player, you know, in the region, internationally, that perhaps because of their internal issues, the significance of Algeria's role has declined over these last years. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about your perspective on Algeria internally and how you see the situation there moving forward.
Thank you.
Thank you. That is
Yeah.
that is a very, very good question, and you are right. Let me just answer one of the parts regarding U.S.-Algeria. U.S.-Algerian relations in the last 20 years, I would say since 9/11, and they improved considerably. There are historical reasons, and you know that. It goes back to the 50s, despite Senator Kennedy, John Kennedy, at the time, favoring the Algerian independence and so on and so forth. But relations got sour because of the Arab-Israeli conflict. They broke diplomatic relations in 1967 between Algeria and the United States. But they still continue to have good economic relations, which have persisted until today. And in terms of the war on terrorism, the collaboration is pretty good, I would say, in that regard. But I always, and your point is very well taken about the U.S. trying to balance out, even though I always argue the U.S. is neutral, but on the side of Morocco. This whole notion even of autonomy and whatnot was made in the U.S. in some part. It was Spain,
Thank
France,
you.
and the United States. But he wanted to know about what's going on inside Algeria. But where you are right, the decline of Algeria occurred because of the domestic situation, where you had a president who was non-functional, and he was basically he was Mr. Foreign policy, so nothing could happen without him. The only thing that in terms of foreign policy regionally was the military. So, and that cannot go beyond the borders. But I stop here, but I can answer later the other part of the question, more domestic, if you are, if the chair would allow me.
Thank you very much. I think let us a little bit change our schedule, because we want to give a floor to our dear friend Creir Balyan, transferring more to Mashriq, because you know, although the items of Maghreb are extremely interesting, but still we have much to say about Mashriq, as you know, there are very important events there during this year. Please, Creir.
Thank you, Konstantin, for first of all for the invitation to take part in this meeting, very important meeting, and it's really wonderful to see so many friends around this virtual table. I miss seeing them in person. I guess this is second best to being able to have face-to-face discussions as we've been used to having the last many years. Let me start with the Biden administration, the incoming Biden administration. What, if any, changes that may spell out for the Middle East? As Konstantin said, let's focus on the Mashriq. Maghreb is not my forte. I confess I've never worked in the Maghreb, but in the Mashriq I have. And with some of you, we have worked together on some of the issues in, especially in Syria, relating to Syria. But as an outside observer of this presidential administration transition in the US, but having observed and read and spoken with many of the people from the Obama administration who were out in the cold during the last 4 years in think tanks, universities, etc., and we collaborated with some of them at least, and now are coming back to the Biden administration. In this interim period, they've published a lot of articles that could be very instructive in terms of where they're heading, or at least what the debates would be within the Biden administration as they prepare to take office on January 20th. I mean, one thing that is clear is, and that would be a welcome change from my perspective, from the Carter Center. I should have introduced myself. I'm the Director for Conflict Resolution at the Carter Center here in Atlanta, Georgia. At least from our perspective, one thing that is likely to change to the better is that we're likely to see with the Biden administration's foreign policy team more diplomacy and less bullying. And I think that would be a very welcome change. We cannot talk about no bullying and purely diplomacy, but more diplomacy, less bullying is a proper way to put it. And I think we are likely to see, as some of you have already pointed out, changes with respect to the US policy to Iran. Again, from the public publications that we've seen from the people who've now taken office in the new administration, foreign policy team, we can predict that there's going to be a debate going on within the administration on how to return to the JCPOA. I don't think there's a question whether or not the US will return to the JCPOA, but how the US would return to the JCPOA. And I think the Biden administration will consider this a priority issue to be implemented as quickly as possible the first few months of returning to Washington, to the White House. I think Alexander Aksenenok already detailed some of the differences of views and possible disagreements on how they can return to JCPOA. But in my view, in our view, the sooner they return, the better for the stability of the region, not just Iran, but for the whole stability of the region. I don't want to elaborate more on that. Next, I think another debate taking place within the administration is, let me preface this with a more general statement on the Middle East. I don't think the Middle East is going to be a priority for the Biden administration. Those who were in the Obama administration burned their hands very badly in the Middle East during the time of the Obama administration, whether it's with the Arab Spring, whether it's their action or inaction in Syria, whether it is allowing Saudi Arabia or giving a amber light to Saudi Arabia to start the war, et cetera, et cetera. There are many areas in which the Obama administration burned its hands in the Middle East. So that would probably dictate extreme caution to re-engage in the Middle East for the Biden administration. One issue which is a priority for us at the Carter Center and on which we've been working very hard for years now, and we've been working with some of you around this table on this issue, is the sanctions on Syria. Sanctions that have become purely punitive sanctions and nothing more, sanctions that have changed absolutely nothing in the Syrian government, Syrian regime's President Assad's behavior, conduct with respect to its own people or the international community or the conduct of the war. Sanctions that have been purely punitive have produced absolutely no results. So what we've been urging, with some help from you, again, some of you around this table, is to use sanctions, now that the sanctions are in place, to use these sanctions at the very least, not as a punitive measure, but as a conflict transformative measure. That is, using sanctions relief as a lever to convince the government in Damascus to take some positive steps, step by step at a time.
Excuse me, Prayer, how many minutes you need to extend your speech?
2 minutes, please.
Okay.
I may. Okay. So this is one issue where I think the people around this table can weigh in to make a difference in the debate taking place within the Biden administration's foreign policy team on this issue. And this is a very, very important issue that I think we need to weigh in. The next point I wanted to make is on Israel and what impact the new administration will have on Israel and Netanyahu. As you all know, Israel is going to yet another election within the next probably 3 months, most likely in February framework. And how would this impact the Israeli policies? Perhaps it's not such a big question because I don't see much of a difference coming from the Biden administration with respect to the Israeli policies on settlements, Palestinian issues, and so forth. But there's one place where it may make a difference, and that is the confluence of interest between Netanyahu's government and the Trump administration on undermining Iranian interest in the Middle East through Israel, through Israeli action. There, I think Israel has had an unconditional green light from the Trump administration to go forward with its actions. Proof of it is the recent assassination of the nuclear scientist. I think at the very least that unconditional green light would turn into an amber light at the very least, yellow light at the very least, not giving them unconditional and blank check to do as they wish with with Iran, playing very, very dangerously with fire with Iran in engulfing also the whole region. Let me stop here. Thank you.
Thank you. I have a question by Nikolai Surkov, but before he puts it, I wanted to put a question to Freire Baloyan. How do you think the big deal, will it lead to a certain change in the leadership in the Middle East? I mean, the increase of the role of the Gulf countries, and what about Egypt? Will it regain its role as a one of the dominant powers of the region? Please.
The short answer is I doubt it.
Mm-hmm.
I very much doubt it, the short answer. So let me answer perhaps more fully when we hear Nikolai Sukhov's question.
Okay. Nikolai Sukhov's question to Yahya Zubair: what is your opinion about the threat of the radical Islamism in Maghreb? Is there a chance of an Islamist insurgency in Tunisia? Please, Yahya.
If you look at what happened, and that joins what Ambassador Feinstein said, asked, if you looked at the Iraq, the Islamists were basically absent from the process. As far as Algeria is concerned, the threat of radical Islamism is not gone. Social conservatism is still there, but radical Islamism as we knew it in the 1990s, that's over. The threat will come, believe me, not from Tunisia, but from Morocco. Morocco, where there are serious economic problems, disparities have been growing, and so on and so forth. But whether there will be an insurgency, in Tunisia, I doubt it very much. What is dangerous, though, is the fallout of what's going on in Libya going into Tunisia. That's where the problem is. And that is why Algerian forces, Algerian troops have basically not only defending Algeria, but also trying to defend Tunisia's borders. This being said, whether there is, if there is a spot of conflict, then you may see a wave of young people joining radical for extremist groups somewhere. Right now, it's more or less contained, the ones from Libya coming in, but you remember that Tunisia's largest contingent of extremists, they went to Syria and Iraq. Right now, it doesn't seem to be the case. Will it happen? It's possible, because all those who were disgruntled with the Nahda, because the Nahda became a party like any other party, playing within the system. So the youth or the ones who had followed a Nahda joined the extremist groups. But I don't think that the Maghreb is open to some sort of insurgency as happened in the 1990s in Algeria.
Thank you, Yahya. maybe it's time to give a floor to Ambassador Jerry Fetterson for intervention. Please, Ambassador Jerry.
Thank you so much, Konstantin, and again, delighted to be part of this conversation. I wanted to follow up on some of Mr. Balian's comments about what we can anticipate from the Biden administration and how they might address some of these issues. And just let me start by saying that I joined the U.S. government in 1975 when Gerald Ford was the president and retired in 2016 at the end of the Obama administration. And in all of that time, I never saw any incoming U.S. administration that sought to prioritize issues in the Middle East. The U.S. has turned to Middle East issues because of the force of events, not because any administration wanted to be deeply involved. I think the Biden administration is no different in that regard. But having said that, I think that what I understand in my conversations with the transition teams is that they do see opportunities in the Middle East. And one of the things that is going to be driving the Biden administration in its early days on the foreign policy side, which is absolutely going to be secondary to domestic issues. But on the foreign policy side, they see two potential areas where they can get what they're calling quick wins. One, of course, is the JCPOA or the Iran file, if you will. And I think that Mr. Balian is absolutely correct in saying that this is going to be complicated. It's going to be complicated because of the dynamics of the situation in the region itself, but also because of the domestic political dynamics here in the United States, where there's a great deal of skepticism about U.S.-Iranian negotiations. I think that the Biden administration, which has been clear that it wants to return to the JCPOA, but will require that the Iranians commit to returning to their obligations in the agreement. And I think that there's going to be a need on the part of the Biden people to demonstrate that what they are achieving through their negotiations with Iran in some way improves on or goes beyond the JCPOA itself, at least in terms of extending the sunset provisions of the agreement to take into account that 5 years have passed since the agreement was originally signed. And there's a tendency here to look at differences about Iran as a straight Republican-Democratic divide. That's not correct. There are many Democrats who are as skeptical about the Iran nuclear deal as Republicans are, including senior members of the U.S. Congress, the Chuck Schumers and Bob Menendez's of the U.S. Senate are not big fans of the JCPOA and will look very carefully at anything that the Biden administration tries to do. The other area where the Biden administration is likely to try to achieve some progress early on because they think that it's an available agreement is on Yemen. And Yemen is important, one, because it is an irritant in terms of our relationships with our Gulf partners. Also because if they can get an agreement on Yemen, it is something that will reduce tensions in the Gulf. And that's something that they very much desire to do. And again, that can be an aspect of the renewed dialogue with Iran. Not to say that Iran can deliver the Houthis, I don't believe that they can, but an Iranian thumbprint on the situation will improve the environment that hopefully would bring the parties back to the negotiating table and allow them to end this conflict, which is, of course, a catastrophe on the humanitarian side and also on the political and security sides. On Israel, I do believe, again, I don't think that this is going to be a priority for the administration. I think that They will look at the situation and recognize that here again, on neither side of the issue, neither on the Israeli side nor the Palestinian side, are the leaderships ready for a serious negotiation. But I do think that the Biden administration is almost certainly going to try to roll back some of the steps that the Trump administration took, this deal of the century aspect, the complete alignment between US and Israeli interests on the Palestinian issue are going to be rolled back. I think that the US is going to restore assistance to the Palestinian Authority. They're going to restore assistance to UNRWA, and they are going to restore direct diplomatic engagement with the Palestinian leadership, which again has been frozen for the last several years under Trump. So those steps are going to happen. Whether that leads to anything, they're going to press for new negotiations. We've already seen the Palestinians taking some steps that they think might improve the atmosphere for at least a US-Palestinian relationship and a dialogue that can help improve the prospects in Washington for a more favorable situation. And one thing, again, to bring it back to US domestic politics, one of the things that's happened over the last several years, it goes back even to the end of Obama, is the fact that Israel has become a partisan issue in the United States in a way that it has not been since the early 1960s or the 1950s, and particularly among younger, more progressive members of the Democratic caucus in Congress. Israel is not a positive story. They're much more inclined to be sympathetic to the Palestinians than any previous US political leadership has been. And that is probably going to influence, to a certain extent, the direction that the Biden administration takes. And then on the last point that I'll make on Syria, Mr. Balian's point, I think that we've already seen Tony Blinken, the Secretary of State nominee for the Biden administration, acknowledged during the campaign that the handling of Syria was one of the regrets that he has as having been the Deputy Secretary of State in the Obama administration, that we were not more aggressive in trying to broker a diplomatic end to the conflict. Whether that is realistic or not is something that remains to be seen. But I think that we are going to see two issues on Syria. One is a renewed effort on the part of the United States to push for a return to diplomacy on Syria. And the second is the likelihood that the US is going to continue its small footprint security presence in Syria, in the Northeast, particularly in terms of combating the threat from the Islamic State. So those aspects are almost certainly going to happen. Where we go on Syria from there remains to be seen. And let me stop there. Thank you, Konstantin.
Thank you. There is an important question to Ambassador Peterson from Alexei Khlebnikov. How do you see Biden's administration dealing with Turkey and Syrian Kurds issue at the same time? What are the prospects of these policies, please?
Turkey is going to be a real challenge for the administration, the Biden administration. There are, for several reasons. One is that you're going to see, I think, in the Biden administration, a desire to rebalance US foreign policy and to bring back some relationship to American values, to defense of human rights and civil liberties. And this is going to create tensions in our relationship with Saudi Arabia, with the UAE, with Egypt, and with Turkey. There is also, I think, the likelihood that through NATO, the US is going to increase the pressure on Turkey for some of the issues, particularly the S-400, but also where the Turks are completely out of step. Nagorno-Karabakh was an issue that created frictions and tensions within the NATO alliance between where Turkey stood in support of Azerbaijan and where the rest of the community was in terms of support for Armenia. So that's going to be an issue. And then, of course, the Syrian Kurds was a problem for the U.S. in the Obama administration when we first decided to support the KDP. It's going to continue to be a problem. I think that it's going to be extremely difficult, and there's a larger question, of course, of Turkey's continued membership in the broader Western alliance. Is this something that's going to continue, or is Turkey finally going to break away? And how they deal with the Kurdish issue is going to be a part of where we go more broadly with Turkey as a NATO member, as a member of the Western community.
Thank you. Then Ambassador Feddersen, Yahya Zubair wants to put a question to you. Please, Yahya.
Do you think that the Biden administration would revert this declaration on recognizing Morocco's sovereignty on Western Sahara, or is it a fait accompli that we will go along with, or how do you see it?
The Trump administration has taken a number of steps along these lines of endorsing things that are completely contrary to longstanding U.S. policies and in fact the international community. I was talking to a Moroccan journalist about this. So yeah, I don't think that you can undo it. I think that what is done is done. The U.S. has recognized Moroccan sovereignty. But the point that I made is that actually, whether the U.S. recognizes Moroccan sovereignty in the Western Sahara or doesn't actually mean anything. The fact of the matter is that you have UN Security Council resolutions that define what the international relationship is, what the international position is on resolving the Western Sahara issue. The U.S. is a signatory. As recently as October, the U.S. voted to continue the MINURSO program and to sustain the standard international position. So I think that what I hope we'll see is the U.S. saying, okay, that's fine, we recognize, but it doesn't fix the problem. You still need to fulfill the obligations under Security Council resolutions. You still need to find a way of bringing the Polisario and the other players into a resolution before you can end the Western Sahara conflict.
Thank you, Ambassador Feddersen. So let's give floor to other participants. If anyone wants to intervene, please, gentlemen, ladies, anyone.
Konstantin, Nikolai Surkov wants to say something, as I know.
Yes, please.
Yes, it will be a two-finger intervention on my behalf because we were talking a lot about the changes that happened in 2012 and 20. But what I also noticed this year that clearly the region, the bigger Middle East and North Africa, is becoming an area where the great powers are competing once again, very much the way it was during the Cold War. And I'm judging by my own experience. Even in the beginning of this year, we were mostly talking about potential for US-Russia cooperation, at least in Syria, in Libya. But nowadays, we are seeing a very different picture. Because now even many Americans, including the military, are talking about the containment of the Russian activities in this region. So it seems that very soon we will have we won't have any cooperation, that we will have rivalry, and this will be an area where Russia and the United States, or maybe the West in general, that's where the confrontation will take place. So it is a very disturbing development, and I would like Ambassador Fairstein to comment on that, because recently, well, yesterday I was listening to a NATO official speaking, and I asked him a question about, well, what is the attitude of the NATO towards the Russian presence in this region? And he told me absolutely blatantly that, oh, okay, he said, we can tolerate Russian presence in Syria because the Russians were there for decades, but we will not tolerate Russian presence in Libya. And it was stated in a way that some active steps might be taken. So this is very disturbing. Thank you.
Thank you. So before I give the floor to Vladimir Bartinov, I want to inform you that our colleague from Iran, Kayman Barzigar, joined the round table, and maybe we'll give him a floor, especially trying to have an answer to a question whether the role of Iran increased or declined in the region during the last year, taking into consideration the line of protest that took place in Iraq, and also assassination of two prominent Iranian politicians, I would say. Okay, so please, Vladimir, yes.
I would first give a floor to dear Kayhan Barzigar. I think it's important to hear him speak, and I will follow later if he wants to add something.
So, Kayman, do you want to speak now? Yes, please.
Okay, thank you very much. I think this is a great discussion, and I wanted to say that the situation in Iran is rather intense by the assassinating of Iranian nuclear scientists, and we have two trends right now. One is to say that we need to take revenge, and the another is saying that the timing is not right and we should wait and see, because Iran's government is somehow stick with diplomacy and finding diplomatic way to deal with America right now. So we are trying to somehow figure out how the situation would go ahead. But in terms of changing Iran's regional policy with coming to the office of President Biden and withdrawing of Trump, I think it's good news that President Trump is going, because he has brought a lot of difficulty for Iran on sanctions, especially in the hard time of coronavirus period, and the Iranian are not happy with that. Before that, the Iranian government was angry of the U.S. government. Right now, the nation of Iran are also against this policy. So the hope is that the Biden could somehow reverse Trump's policy. And I believe that Iran's regional policy will not change with Biden, because the logic of Iran's regional policy is based on deterrent and, somehow deterring or containing the threats. So for us, this argument of, limiting Iran's missiles program, which is a conventional deterrent power, and at the same time, Iran's regional active presence is denied by the US government, I don't think that this will change that much on Iran's regional policy. My thought is that Iran cannot afford to leave, the region aside. But I think one thing could be acceptable, and that is that regional talk could be, a way of starting on any possible, talk between Iran and the US in a broader regional cooperation. But including the missile issue will kill the entire, talk. So my proposition is that the Biden administration should somehow, differentiate between these two matters, which are very much important. And if he goes the Trump's way, that is to weakening Iran and then negotiate with Iran, it is doomed to fail. I think President Biden should reverse this policy and immediately compensate the previous actions against Iran. That's my thought.
Thank you very much, Kayhan. Excuse me that I mistook your name, but actually it was a mistake in what was written to me in a message by Vasiliev. But we know you perfectly. We met many times, if you remember me too. So
Yeah, absolutely.
thank you for
Absolutely.
this intervention. Please, Vladimir Bartenyov.
Yes, thank you very much for giving
And then
opportunity
Alexei Maloshenko, I see your hand, yes.
to speak. My intervention will be devoted mostly to the question of also U.S. Engagement, disengagement, this axis of thinking, and on fragility and failed states, the point that was touched upon in Nikolai Surkov's presentation. What we heard today actually about the US policy, it seems to me that still the rumors about the US disengagement from the region are highly exaggerated. Maybe I will be the only one in this room, in this Zoom conference, but I think that this soft talk about that the United States will do everything to concentrate on other regions is a little bit misleading, because we talk about this as a sort of, some kind of general policy without differentiating between the sub-regions, between instruments that the US use, policy instruments. To me, even Trump administration or Biden administration that will follow will still have the same portfolio of quite large one of instruments that it might use: military, political, diplomatic, sanctions, aid policies, aid instruments, etc. And Dr. Balyan said that we have bullying versus diplomacy. I think bullying is not an instrument; it's a behavior, quite destructive one, but it's not an instrument, right? And if we talk about instruments, it will be diplomacy versus what? Versus coercive military operations, or versus military presence, a large one. If we talk about large military presence, the Trump administration was not that different from Obama administration in terms of not wanting to engage too much in the Middle East. I think we still think about the US Middle Eastern policies as, stereotypical George W. Bush type of Middle Eastern policy, much more than the policies of the recent years. This is one thing. Another thing is that if we talk about differentiated approach, it's very clear to me, at least as a specialist in foreign aid issues, that the United States do not approach even Mashrek countries or MENA countries in general as a single entity, and it does not use the same policy, because we still have Egypt and Jordan as the main recipients of the bulk of the US foreign aid. It was like this for ages, and it will be like this for ages, because we have multi-year agreements, at least with Jordan, that already, that already structure the way how the US will deal with Jordan. And it won't change. The Obama administration, for example, wanted to do something about democracy promotion in Egypt. Ambassador Feinstein said that Biden administration probably will change, will put more pressure on Egypt, probably. But as the Obama experience clearly demonstrated us, this period of pressure would be very quick and very ineffective, because there are so many internal powers within the United States who do not want to do anything about $1.5 billion military aid to Egypt that is so good for a military complex or for pro-Israel lobby. As far as I see it, sorry if I'm being very very straight about this. And 2 or 3 more points. I think we have to also keep in mind the the willingness of different administrations to rely on regional actors in solving its problems. The Obama administration wanted to engage regional actors more, right? Trump administration also wanted to engage them more, but actually it turned out that these actors, even if they are engaged, do not behave in a way that is that the United States welcome, and that it creates more problems for the United States themselves. And this will be a problem for Biden administration as well, if it opts for more multilateral approach. Would all these partners, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, or United Arab Emirates or Egypt, will be willing to talk and to behave more, more accordingly to the US interests. And also about the competition, with new phase of great power competition in the Middle East. I think the problem with prioritization of the Middle East that Ambassador Feinstein so brilliantly put, that none of the US administrations ever prioritized the Middle East in the beginning, right? But the events dragged it into this sphere, into this region. I think it can be also applied to the current situation, because even if the United States does not want to engage in the Middle East as much as it wanted probably 20 years back then, but to secure its interests against China or against Russia in the Chinese neighborhood, in parentheses, or in Russian neighborhood, is much more difficult than to challenge China or Russia in more remote regions, such as the Mediterranean or the area of One Belt, One Road. So I think it can be much more provocations between these great powers in the region. And if I may, the last point that I could not help making about fragility and failed states, and I also saw the Vasily Kuznetsov's comment, which really also resonates with my thinking. I think if we keep thinking that states were very stable until a certain point in 2011, and something happened and they turned into failed states, we miss the point, because the fragility is an eternal thing. It can be, it can be very protracted. Every single state is fragile at some point. It depends only about the level of resilience that it has towards external shocks. When external shocks grow larger, it becomes more the state becomes more fragile. And I think we have to keep that in mind and abandon probably even the term failed states, which sounds very Weberian.
Excuse me, how many minutes do you need?
I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you. Before I give the floor to Alexei Maloshenko, I see that Kakan Barzigar wanted to add something. Please.
Yes, I wanted to also mention another element that can imbalance the power politics of the region, and that's Trump's policy towards Israel. and how it can impact Iran-Arab relations nowadays. I think it was a mistake that Trump closened the US to Israel by bringing, the American embassy to same time trying in artificial peace between, Israel and some Arab countries in the Persian Gulf. That gives Israel a kind of supremacy that it will not deserve, because Israel was the focus of the, geopolitical conflict in the region, and now it has a kind of dominance on the regional issues that will not benefit any countries. And I think that will be the source of instability in the future, because Iran will not tolerate it, and it is contradicts with the Turkish regional ambitions. And therefore, I think that Russia will react on that, because Israel might go too far, and that will lead Russia to react on this matter as well. So I think with the Trump gone, we need to think of a new kind of, Israeli involvement in the regional issues. It's too dangerous. We feel it in Tehran. So I wanted to mention this.
Yes, thank you. Now, Alexei Maloshenko, please. And then after you, I think that Jerry Fetterson also wanted to add something. Please, Alexei.
Thank you so much for this conference or meeting. I don't know how to call it.
Round table.
Yes, some round table. Even it's better. So I guess it's time to generalize a little bit for a couple of minutes. So I think about the main process in the Middle East, because before we spoke about Iraq, Iran, Libya, Tunisia, and so on. But to my mind, we have to pay attention to the big process, two big processes. Maybe it's possible, maybe not. First of all, is it possible a certain democratization in Middle East? I don't know, perhaps. Next, point two, is should we predict the recreation, the existence of authoritarianism? Yes, and from that point of view, everything some depends on so-called, as Nikolai Surkov mentioned, some dramatic shifts. Who will come? Who will stay? And I think, and both variants, both some roads, and democratizations, and the recreation of the continuity of authoritarianism is very important. So what will have, how it will some develop in generally, because it's important for each country, for Algeria, for Saudi Arabia. I mentioned some different societies. So we have to think in this direction. What will have in generally main processes? Yes. Next problem is above mentioned Islamic trouble, Islamist trouble. I don't know what kind of level the Islamism, political Islam, will reach next 3, 5, or more some years, because somebody told today that Islamism, for example, in Tunisia, somewhere else, may disappear. It becomes more and more weaker. But I remember that the same things were told in the end of 90s. I remember some of my colleagues, for instance, Olivier Roy from France, they wrote about about the end of Islamism, about that this trend is disappearing. And nobody could predict the emergence, let me say, Islamic State. Just I hate all kind of comparisons, but anyway, sometimes Islamism reminds me the coronavirus, first wave, second wave, and so on. So we have to be ready. I don't insist, I don't know. But as it was told before, some dramatic shifts, I think it doesn't exclude the reappearance, some Islamism. I don't know so well, and nobody knows. But however, we have to be ready. It is not excluded from the political map in Middle East and not only so there. And the last point we spoke today, we mentioned the activity of external actors. Okay, I totally agree. But their activity depends on who will stay on power, what kind of regimes so we'll have. Also, I don't want to predict anything, but anyway, let's imagine the situation, impossible perhaps, is a situation, the disappearance of Bashar Assad. What Russia will do? As example, just I repeat, I don't insist. But anyway, when we try to understand the position of external actors, would it be United States, Russia, Turkey, Iran, and somebody else? But I think that we here, experts, and the politicians in Tehran and Washington and Moscow, indeed they have to take into consideration how the domestic situation will develop. Because sometimes it seems that in big capitals, they are sure that everything in Middle East, would it be in Libya, in Syria, somewhere else, some depends on their position. So once again, I agree with the idea about a dramatic some shifts, but to my mind, it more and more depends on how it will develop also within a Middle East, in countries and in general in region, including, by the way, countries of Maghreb. Thank you.
Thank you. Ambassador Jerry Fairstein wanted to respond to Nikolai's question on US-Russia competition in the Middle East. Please, Ambassador.
Thank you, Konstantin. And very quickly, I just wanted to say that I think one of the things that we can anticipate in the Biden administration is that there will be a much more predictable diplomatic engagement on the part of the United States on all issues internationally, but also in terms of the Middle East. And my own sense, I think that certainly we're going to move from the era of the Trump administration where the relationship between the United States and Russia was unpredictable, depending on whether Donald Trump was going to intervene, what was the bureaucracy thinking versus what the White House was thinking. It's not going to be like that with the Biden administration. I think that we will know where each party is coming from. And so I think, again, there will be opportunities while we will compete with Russia as we're going to compete with China in the region. At the same time, I would say that there are going to be opportunities for cooperation in areas where we can find common interest. I would certainly say that in terms of managing the Iran file, this is an area where the US and Russia work well together. In the Obama administration, I would anticipate that as the Biden administration is trying to come back into some kind of re-engagement with Iran, that where Russia is and how Russia acts is a possibility for closer cooperation and coordination between Moscow and Washington. I would also say, and again, based on my own experience, Yemen was an issue where the US and Russia worked very well together in 2011, 2012. There was a very close coordination both in Sana'a as well as in New York between the US and Russia on managing the Yemen account. I think, again, that there is no reason why the US and Russia shouldn't cooperate on resolving the Yemen conflict at this point. So I think that, again, there's going to be the possibility that you'll have an administration in Washington that will be actively looking for areas where our interests are parallel or in congruence. And if we can develop those, then that will be a positive element. Thanks.
Thank you. Then Yahya Zubair wanted to answer Alexei Maloshenko, please, Dr. Yahya.
Thank you for giving me the floor. I have 2 points, one regarding authoritarianism. Regarding authoritarianism, I don't see any type of, or at least some hope for democratization, not because it cannot happen from within. It could. Algeria is certainly a good candidate. Tunisia is also a good candidate. But if you look at the role that the negative role that the Gulf Arabs are playing, one of the policies of the UAE in Saudi Arabia was to undo any movement towards democratization. So in that sense, I am quite pessimistic about any move towards such democratization, if you want to call it that way, especially since even democracies themselves look at the relationship with the Sisi, for instance, or some others. And I was alluding to it when I talked about, how you can violate international law in the name of some economic interest or what have you. So I am not optimistic that even Western democracies will be promoting democratization or what have you. The second one is to correct Mr. Maloshenko. I did not say Islamism is dead. I never said that. The question that was addressed to me regarding an insurgency, I said an insurgency in the same type of what had happened in the 1990s in Algeria, that I doubt very much. In Libya, yes, there is, there are many of the militias are Islamist or extremist groups, and they are influenced by either Daesh or ISIS or Al Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb or what have you. And I want to be clear on this point. I did not say that Islamism is dead. Political Islam is well and alive, but it depends on the form that it may take. In Tunisia, for instance, political Islam is there, is in power. You have it in Turkey as well. So you have to differentiate between extremists and what is, political Islam or Islamism in general. That's I think it's very important to distinguish.
May I add a couple of
Yes,
words?
please.
Well, I agree with you. And more, I think that so-called moderate Islamism, it's our past, present, and future. It's practically inevitable. How we'll work with it, it's our problem. But anyway, it will continue. Thank you.
Thank you. So, ladies and gentlemen, we are working more than 2 hours. I think it's time for conclusion, actually. I think it was an interesting discussion. We, of course, didn't answer all the questions put, but still we tried to answer many of these questions. Anyhow, I wouldn't say lots. I would say that actually we may conclude that the current year has added more to developments in the region, including what was happening within what we may call an interplay between different countries, groups of countries, etc. Still, I believe in what I put in the schedule since the beginning, that the trench between Maghreb and the rest of the region is very serious. How will it be overcome? It's another story. And here we may agree to a great extent with Dr. Yahya Zubair, for instance, with the ambassador Feierstein, etc. So then speaking about the non-regional powers, it is evident that non-Arab powers, I'm sorry, they began, dominant actors in the region since a period of time, but the role of Turkey and Iran, up to my mind, it survived what may be called American heels in Russian, and Russian heels in America, going up and down. Because, for instance, if we speak about the lines of Iran's influence, they have interruptions in these lines during this year, which are important and must be thought about. Then Turkey gained maybe lots in geopolitical point of view, and also it gained a lot of enemies at the same time, even inside the alliance of NATO. Okay, but the role of Israel, due to the big deal, maybe was more straight. Probably I may be wrong, but it seems so, at least. Then speaking about the living administration, I think that it put several poisonous milestones in the Middle East to Obama administration, which will be rather difficult to overcome. And it was stressed by some participants. As to Russian-American relations, of course, I agree with those who say that we have no floor to be very optimistic about future of Russian-American relations in the Middle East. And then the last one is the last conclusion that Middle East is escaping from the priorities of United States policy, actually. What will it mean? Okay, as what was stated by many people, these are, I wouldn't say these are absolute conclusions, but still these are impressions for what was said during this round table. So thank you for participation, and I happen that we will work down something interesting out of it, maybe a paper, maybe a book even. Thank you very much once more. I wish good luck, and I wish everyone to overcome this damn disease. Goodbye. Thank you.